The wind came down from the red rocks before dawn, carrying dust and the promise of another scorching day. It whistled through the gaps in the weathered planks of the Coyote Ledger Inn, rattling the tin sign that hung crooked above the door. Inside, Lila Mae Carter was already awake, her hands working flour and lard into biscuit dough while the coffee pot gurgled on the cast-iron stove. She paused to wipe her flour-dusted hands on her apron, then picked up the torn jacket she'd been mending for a traveling merchant. The needle caught the lamplight as she worked, her stitches small and precise despite the early hour. Outside, she could hear the first sounds of Dry Creek stirring to life, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant bray of a mule, the metallic clang from the direction of the silver mine. Through the kitchen window, she spotted Eli McKenna's broad shoulders bent over a wagon wheel in the yard. He'd arrived just after midnight with old Samuel's freight wagon, the rear axle split clean through. Now he worked in the pale pre-dawn light, fitting new spokes with the patient precision of a man who understood that rushed work meant dead travelers in this unforgiving country. Lila found herself watching the economical grace of his movements, the way his hands, scarred and capable, coaxed the wood into place. She'd seen those hands do delicate work before carving a toy horse for the Watson boy, setting the tiny gears of Mrs. Henley's mantel clock. Strange hands for a man who'd once tracked outlaws through the Sonoran desert. "Coffee's ready," she called through the window. Eli straightened, pressing a hand to his lower back. "Obliged." His voice carried that particular rasp of a man who'd spent too many years breathing trail dust. She poured 2 cups and carried one outside, the morning air cool against her skin. He took it gratefully, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. Neither of them acknowledged the contact. "Samuel heading out today?" she asked. "Soon as I get this wheel secured, taking supplies up to the camp at Juniper Ridge." Eli sipped the coffee, his gray eyes scanning the horizon where the sun was just beginning to paint the rocks pink and gold. "Might want to fill extra water barrels today? Wind's been from the west for 3 days running." Lila nodded. In Dry Creek, wind patterns mattered. West wind meant the dust storms would follow, sometimes for days. It meant grit in everything: food, water, bedding. It meant good folks would huddle indoors while the bad ones used the cover to move unseen. "I'll tell Mr. Carey," she said, referring to the inn's owner, "though he'll likely say we can't spare the water." "Man's tighter than bark on a tree," Eli agreed, a rare hint of humor softening his weathered features. The moment was interrupted by the thunder of hooves on the hard-packed street. Both turned to see a group of riders pulling up in front of the Wells Fargo office, their horses lathered with sweat. Lila recognized the lead rider, Tom Brennan, one of the guards from the mining company. "Trouble," Eli murmured, setting down his cup. They weren't the only ones who'd noticed. Doors opened along the street, and folks began gathering, drawn by that particular magnetism of bad news in a small town. Lila untied her apron and followed Eli toward the growing crowd. "Hit the strongbox wagon about 2 miles out from Coyote Springs," Brennan was saying, his voice carrying over the murmur of voices. "Killed both guards. Made off with the whole payroll. Anybody get a look at them?" This from Sheriff Dalton, pushing through the crowd with his deputy in tow. Too dark, but they knew exactly when we'd be coming through. Had to be someone with inside knowledge. Lila felt the shift in the crowd's mood, the way suspicious glances began darting from face to face. In a town like Dry Creek, where half the population drifted in and out with the seasons, trust was as scarce as water. "Found this at the scene." Brennan held up a scrap of fabric, a lady's handkerchief, delicate lacework around the edges, the letter L embroidered in one corner. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Lila's stomach dropped, her hand instinctively going to her pocket where she kept her own handkerchiefs. But no, hers were plain cotton, practical things without any fancy work. "Well now." A smooth voice cut through the noise. Victor Hale stepped forward, his suit too fine for the dust and heat of Dry Creek, his smile sharp as a skinning knife. As manager of the mining company and owner of half the businesses in town, his word carried weight. Seems we might have ourselves a lead. His pale eyes swept the crowd and landed on Lila. "Miss Carter, don't you do needlework for the ladies in town? Seems I recall you embroidering some mighty fine handkerchiefs for the girls over at the Silver Finch." Every eye turned to her. Lila lifted her chin, meeting Hale's gaze steadily. "I do needlework for anyone who pays, Mr. Hale, including your wife, last I checked." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, quickly stifled. Hale's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Of course, I'm simply suggesting we should check with anyone who might recognize this particular piece. After all, with the railroad surveyor coming through next month to decide where to put the depot, we can't have folks thinking Dry Creek harbors thieves and murderers." The threat was subtle but clear. The railroad depot would mean life or death for Dry Creek. Whichever town got it would prosper. The others would dry up and blow away like tumbleweeds. And Hale owned the land around the water, rights the most valuable commodity if the railroad came through. "I can account for Miss Carter's whereabouts." Eli's voice was calm, but carried an undertone that made several men step back. "She was in the kitchen of the Coyote Ledger when the robbery took place. I was fixing a wagon in the yard and could see her through the window. Unless she's learned to be in two places at once, she had nothing to do with this." Sheriff Dalton looked relieved to have a witness. Despite his badge, he was a weak man, too deep in Hale's pocket to be worth much. "Well, that settles that." "Does it?" Hale interrupted smoothly. "I'm not suggesting Miss Carter held up the wagon herself, but perhaps she provided information to those who did. After all, she does serve meals to all manner of drifters and saddle tramps at the inn." "That's enough." The voice belonged to Mara Quinn, owner of the Silver Finch Saloon. She pushed through the crowd, her emerald dress catching the morning light, her dark hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour, where other women might have looked out of place on the dusty street. Mara owned every inch of ground she walked on. "That handkerchief is mine," she said coolly. "Or rather, it was. I gave it to Lila last week in trade for mending some costumes for my girls. Anyone who says different is a liar." The crowd stirred uneasily. Calling someone a liar in Dry Creek was serious business, the kind of thing that led to gunplay. But Mara Quinn hadn't survived 10 years running a saloon by backing down. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. And can anyone verify this trade?" "Ruby was there," Mara said, naming one of her dancers. "She'll swear to it." "The word of a saloon girl is worth more than yours." Mara cut him off, her voice sharp as winter ice. "At least everyone knows what they're buying with her." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Several men's hands drifted toward their weapons. The morning suddenly charged with the promise of violence. It was Eli who broke the tension. He stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Lila and the crowd. "Seems to me," he said in that quiet way of his that made folks listen, "we're all getting ahead of ourselves. Sheriff, maybe you ought to do some actual investigating before we start throwing accusations around. Check the hoof prints. Talk to folks who might have seen riders heading out of town. The kind of police work that involves more than standing around jawing." Sheriff Dalton flushed but nodded. "Right. Everyone go on about your business. Tom, you and the boys come give me a full report." The crowd began to disperse, but Lila caught the look Hale threw her way, calculating, predatory, this wasn't over. As folks drifted away, Mara approached, up close. Lila could see the careful paint that covered the lines around her eyes, the weariness that came from too many late nights and hard choices. "We need to talk," Mara said quietly. "But not here. Too many ears." Lila nodded slowly. She'd never had much to do with Mara Quinn beyond the occasional sewing job. Their worlds were separated by more than just the street between the inn and the saloon. "Tonight," Mara continued, "after the dinner crowd clears out, back door of the Silver Finch." She paused, then added softly, That handkerchief wasn't just stolen. Lila, someone broke into Ruby's room last night, went through her things. Whoever's setting you up, they're playing a deep game. With that, she turned and walked away, her back straight as a rifle barrel. Eli hadn't moved from Lila's side. "You don't have to meet her," he said quietly. "Could be walking into trouble." Lila watched Mara's retreating form, thinking of the way the woman had stood up for her, taken a risk she didn't have to take. "Could be," she agreed. "But staying ignorant seems like the bigger danger." They walked back to the inn in silence, both lost in thought. The sun was fully up now, painting Dry Creek in shades of dust and gold. The wind was picking up, just as Eli had predicted, sending small dust devils dancing down the street. As they reached the inn, Eli touched her elbow gently. "I'll be around today. Got some repairs to do for Carrie. You need anything, you call out." It was more words than he usually strung together, and Lila found herself oddly touched by the concern. "I can take care of myself," she said, but softened it with a small smile. "But thank you." He nodded and headed back to his wagon wheel, and Lila returned to her kitchen. But as she kneaded bread for the noon meal, her mind kept circling back to that handkerchief, to Hale's calculating eyes, to Mara's warning about deep games. Outside, the wind continued to build, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rumble of thunder. A storm was coming to Dry Creek, and Lila had the feeling it would bring more than just dust and rain. The dinner crowd had thinned to nothing by the time Lila slipped out the back door of the Coyote Ledger. The moon was new, leaving the alley in thick darkness that seemed to swallow sound. She'd changed from her work dress into a dark skirt and shirtwaist, her hair pinned tight beneath a plain bonnet. No sense making herself an easy target. The Silver Finch's back door was painted green, though the color was hard to make out in the darkness. Lila knocked twice, softly, and waited. The door opened just wide enough for her to slip through. "This way." Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. She led Lila through a narrow hallway that smelled of perfume and tobacco, up a flight of stairs that creaked despite their careful steps. They entered a small office overlooking the main saloon floor. Though the curtains were drawn tight, "Sit." Mara gestured to a chair while she poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "You don't have to drink it, but hold it anyway. Makes talking easier." Lila took the glass, surprised by its weight. Everything in this room spoke of quality: the Turkish rug, the oil paintings, the leather-bound ledgers on the shelf. Whatever else Mara Quinn was, she was no fool with the money. "That handkerchief," Mara began, settling into her own chair. "I need you to understand something. I did give it to you, just like I said, but it was supposed to stay with Ruby. She had an admirer, liked to give her pretty things. That handkerchief was one of them." "Then how?" "That's what worries me." Mara's fingers drummed against her glass. "Ruby's room was locked. She's particular about that, has her reasons. But someone got in, went through everything, took just that one item." Lila felt cold despite the warm night. "Someone who knew it could be traced to me, or to Ruby, or to me." Mara leaned back, studying Lila with dark, calculating eyes. "Question is, why you're nobody. No offense meant. You sew, you cook, you keep your head down. Not the type to make enemies. Victor Hale seems to think different." "Ah." Mara's smile was sharp. "Now we're getting somewhere. What's Hale want with you?" Lila hesitated. In Dry Creek, information was currency, and she wasn't sure what price Mara might extract for her help. But Eli's words echoed in her mind. Staying ignorant was the bigger danger. "Not me specifically. The inn, or more precisely, the water rights that come with it. Old Sam Carey's been refusing to sell." "And you're caught in the middle." Mara nodded slowly. "That's Hale's way. Never comes at a thing straight on. Like a coyote, always circling, looking for the weak spot." She paused. "You know why I really spoke up this morning?" Lila shook her head. "Because I've got my own score with Victor Hale. 3 years ago, I had a girl named Annie. Sweet thing, barely 19, saving up to bring her little sister out from Missouri. Hale took a fancy to her. Wouldn't take no for an answer. One night, he cornered her upstairs. She fought back, scratched him good across the face. Next day, Sheriff found a bag of stolen silver under her bed. She got 5 years hard labor. The whiskey glass trembled in Mara's hand. She died in that prison. Lung fever. They said her sister never made it out of Missouri. I'm sorry, Lila said softly. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Mara set down her glass with a sharp click. Hale's planning something bigger than just getting you run out of town. That railroad depot, whoever controls the water rights when it comes through, will make a fortune. And if the Coyote ledger happens to be abandoned because its cook was hanged for murder, Carrie would have to sell. Lila finished the thought, her stomach churning. But surely he wouldn't, killing those guards. You think Hale cares about 2 hired men? He's got bigger stakes in play. Mara stood, moving to a small safe hidden behind one of the paintings. Which is why I'm going to give you something. Call it insurance. She withdrew a leather portfolio and handed it to Lila. Shipping manifests from the mining company. Look close at the dates, the quantities. Notice anything? Lila studied the papers by lamplight. At first, they seemed ordinary enough ore shipments, supplies coming in, payroll going out. Then she saw it. These numbers don't match. The ore shipments are listed as 10 tons, but the weight certificates show 15. 5 tons of silver that never made it onto the official books. Been going on for months. Now, where do you suppose that extra silver ended up from? You're saying Hale is stealing from his own company? From the investors back east. They trust the reports he sends. Why wouldn't they? He's a respectable man. Mara's voice dripped sarcasm. But stolen silver needs to be moved, converted to cash, and that takes accomplices. A sharp knock at the door made both women freeze. Mara quickly took the portfolio back, shoving it into the safe. Yes. Miss Quinn, a girl's voice, young and frightened. There's trouble downstairs. That McKenna fellow, he's... Lila was out of her chair before the girl finished. She flew down the stairs, Mara close behind, bursting into the main saloon to find Eli surrounded by 4 men. His back was to the bar, his hand resting casual-like on his gun belt. But Lila could see the tension in his shoulders. Asking questions about Miss Carter. One of the men was saying. Lila recognized him as Walt Grissom, one of Hale's hired guns. Thought we should have ourselves a conversation about minding your own business. Conversation seems a bit one-sided, Eli replied calmly. 4 against 1 doesn't speak to your confidence. Don't need confidence when we got numbers. Another man sneered. The saloon had gone dead quiet, patrons frozen over their cards and drinks. Everyone knew the smell of pending violence. That's enough. Lila stepped into view, her voice carrying a strength she didn't feel. Whatever quarrel you've got, it's with me, not him. Grissom's eyes lit with mean satisfaction. Well, the lady herself. Boys, maybe we should escort Miss Carter to see Mr. Hale. He's got some questions about that unfortunate incident this morning. Miss Carter's not going anywhere. Eli hadn't moved, but something in his stance shifted, like a wolf deciding whether to fight or run. Lila had seen him practicing his draw in the early mornings when he thought no one was watching. His hand was fast. Maybe fast enough for 2 of them, but not 4. Stand down, McKenna. This from Sheriff Dalton, pushing through the saloon doors with obvious reluctance. Nobody wants trouble here. Then tell your dogs to heel, Sheriff. Mara's voice cut like a whip. This is my establishment. I decide who stays and who goes. Now, Miss Quinn. Don't Miss Quinn me, you pompous windbag. Mara descended the stairs like a queen to her court. These men are disturbing my customers and threatening my guests. Do your job or get out. The sheriff flushed, caught between his fear of Hale and the immediate threat of Mara's displeasure. In that moment of hesitation, Lila made her choice. She walked directly to Eli's side, placing her hand on his arm. "We were just leaving," she said calmly. "Weren't we?" Eli glanced down at her, and she saw him understand. Together, they moved toward the door, the crowd parting before them, but Grissom stepped into their path. "Mr. Hale still wants to talk to you." "Then, Mr. Hale knows where to find me," Lila replied. "During business hours. Like a civilized person, now move or explain to everyone here why you're preventing a lady from going home." It was a calculated risk, invoking the social rules that even outlaws pretended to follow. For a moment, Grissom's hand twitched toward his gun. Then Mara's voice rang out again. "Jake, Tommy, see Miss Carter and Mr. McKenna to the door. Make sure they get there safely." Two of the house guards materialized from the shadows, shotguns cradled loose but ready. Grissom had no choice but to step aside, his face twisted with fury. Outside, the night air felt cool against Lila's flushed skin. She realized she was shaking, adrenaline making her legs unsteady. Eli's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "That was foolish," he said quietly. "Coming down like that. You were outnumbered. Been outnumbered before." They walked quickly through the dark streets, both aware they might be followed. "What did Mara tell you?" Lila hesitated, then gave him the bare bones, the stolen silver, Hale's scheme with the water rights. Eli listened in silence, his face unreadable in the darkness. "There's more," he said when she finished. "Found something today while I was working. Horse tracks out back of the inn, near the woodpile. Shot different from anything in Carey's stable. Someone was watching the place last night. Before the robbery. Right about the time I said you were in the kitchen." His voice was grim. "Someone wanted to make sure you were there, visible, which means—" "They knew I'd be suspected," Lila finished. "This whole thing was planned to put me in that spot." They'd reached the inn's back door. Eli checked the shadows before letting her enter. "You should leave town. Tonight. I know folks in Tucson who could—" "No!" The word came out harder than she intended. "I've been running my whole life, Eli. From my father's debts. From a marriage that would have killed my soul. From every small-minded person who said I wasn't good enough. I won't run from this." He studied her face in the dim light from the kitchen window. "Then we'd better find proof of what Hale's doing before he finds a way to put a noose around your neck." You think I'd let you face this alone?" There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, something that made her pulse quicken. "Besides, I've got my own debts when it comes to men like Hale. Time I started paying them." Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of breaking glass came from inside the inn. They burst through the door to find the kitchen in chaos, drawers pulled out, flour sacks slashed open, her precious sewing basket upended on the floor. Old Sam Carey stood in the doorway to the dining room, his face pale. "Sheriff came with a search warrant. Said they had to look for evidence. I tried to stop them, but—" "It's all right, Mr. Carey." Lila knelt to gather her scattered thread and needles, fighting back tears of rage. This was her space, her sanctuary, and they'd violated it like they had a right. "They took something," Carey continued miserably. "From your room. A tin box." Lila's heart sank. That box held her savings, 3 years of scrimping and saving, of mending until her fingers bled and cooking until her back screamed. Her dream of a shop of her own. Gone. "Said it was evidence," Carey explained. "Connected to the stolen payroll. I'm sorry, Lila. I'm so sorry." Eli's hand found her shoulder, warm and steady. "We'll get it back," he said quietly. "All of it." But as Lila looked around her destroyed kitchen, she wondered if anything in Dry Creek would ever be the same again. The storm she'd sensed that morning had arrived, and she was standing directly in its path. The dust storm hit Dry Creek just after noon. 3 days after the sheriff had ransacked Lila's kitchen. She'd gone to the general store for salt pork and cornmeal, leaving Eli to repair the dining room shutters that had mysteriously come loose during the night. The sky had been clear when she left, just a brown smudge on the western horizon that might have been nothing. But the old-timers knew better. Josiah Mills had been sitting outside the barber shop, whittling, when he suddenly stood and hurried inside. "Storm coming," he'd muttered. "Big one." By the time Lila emerged from Henderson's store, the smudge had become a wall. It rose hundreds of feet into the air, a rolling brown mountain that swallowed the sun and turned day into twilight. The wind hit first, strong enough to rip bonnets from heads and send anything not nailed down tumbling down the street. "Get inside," someone shouted, but Lila was already running, not toward shelter, but back to the inn. The wind fought her every step, driving grit into her eyes and mouth. She pulled her shawl up over her face, breathing through the fabric as visibility dropped to mere feet. A hand caught her arm, yanking her sideways just as a piece of tin roofing went spinning past where her head had been. She found herself pressed against the wall of the bank, Eli's body shielding her from the worst of the wind. "Are you mad?" he shouted over the howling storm. "Could have killed you." "The windows," she tried to explain, but he was already pulling her along, keeping to the buildings where the wind was slightly less violent. They stumbled more than ran, guided by memory and instinct through the brown darkness. The inn materialized like a ghost ship in fog. They burst through the door together, slamming it shut against the storm's fury. Inside, the air was thick with dust but breathable. Old Sam Carey was frantically closing shutters, his face pale with effort. "Thank God," he wheezed. "Thought you might have been caught outside." They spent the next hour battening down, stuffing rags under doors, covering everything they could with sheets and canvas. The storm raged like a living thing, seeking every crack and gap. Even with their efforts, fine dust sifted down from the ceiling, coating everything in a brown film. When the worst of the work was done, they huddled in the kitchen, Lila, Eli, Carey, and 2 traveling salesmen who'd been lucky enough to be inside when the storm hit. Lila made coffee, though they had to strain it through cheesecloth to remove the grit. "Seen worse," one of the salesmen said, trying for bravado. "Down in Texas, storm lasted 3 days." "This one won't," Eli said quietly. He'd been watching the patterns in the dust, reading signs others missed. "Be done by nightfall, but there'll be damage." He was right. As the sun set, the wind began to ease, and by full dark, an eerie calm had settled over Dry Creek. They ventured out to find a town transformed. Dust drifts rose 3 feet high against buildings. Windows were broken, signs torn away, and there was something else down by the wash, where the storm had scoured away years of accumulated sand. The white bones of cattle gleamed in the moonlight. "That's Hennessy's brand," Carey said, examining the skulls. "Lost his herd in the drought of 78, said they wandered into the wash looking for water." Speaking of water, Lila pointed to the town's main well, where a crowd was gathering. The wooden cover had been torn away by the wind, and now people were hauling up buckets of muddy, undrinkable sludge. "Storm stirred up the bottom," someone said. "It'll settle, but might take days." "The Coyote Ledger has clean water," another voice suggested. "That spring-fed well of Carey's never runs muddy." Lila felt Eli tense beside her. She understood why. In a desert town, water was life. And suddenly, the inn's water rights weren't just valuable, they were essential. As if summoned by their thoughts, Victor Hale appeared, still somehow immaculate despite the storm. "Unfortunate situation," he said smoothly, "but I'm prepared to make a generous offer for water rights. Carey, help the town through this crisis." "At twice the going rate, I suppose." Mara Quinn's voice cut through the murmur. She looked like she'd fought the storm and won, her hair wild but her eyes sharp. How convenient that the town well would fail right when you need leverage. You're suggesting I somehow caused a dust storm? Hale's laugh was cold. Really, Miss Quinn, your imagination— My imagination notices things, Mara interrupted. Like how someone poured a wagon load of alkali salts near the wellhead last week. Claimed it was for the mines, but alkali has a funny way of ruining water when it seeps down. The crowd stirred uneasily. Water tampering was a hanging offense in the territories, but proving it was another matter. Careful with your accusations, Hale warned. Slander is also a crime. So is murder, Eli said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Been wondering about those 2 guards killed in the robbery. Tom Brennan said they knew the route. But I knew Jim Harper, rode with him on the Butterfield line. Man was careful to the point of paranoia. Never took the same route twice. Your point. Hale's voice had lost some of its smoothness. My point is that someone told those robbers exactly where to wait. Someone who could change the route at the last minute. Someone with authority at the mining company. The silence that followed was heavy as the dust-laden air. Then Sheriff Dalton pushed forward, his face red. That's enough wild talk. Storm's got everyone on edge. Everyone go home. Check your property. We'll sort out the water situation in the morning. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. But Lila noticed how many threw speculative glances at Hale as they went. Seeds of doubt, once planted, had a way of growing even in desert soil. Back at the inn, they found unexpected visitors, 3 Apache families who'd taken shelter in the stable during the storm. Carrie started to protest, but Lila cut him off. They're travelers in need, she said firmly. We have space and water. One of the Apache women approached, holding something wrapped in rabbit skin. She spoke in accented English, for the woman with kind hands. She pressed the bundle into Lila's hands. My grandmother's teaching. Inside was a collection of dried herbs and a small leather pouch. The woman showed Lila how to mix them. For the bearing of children, when the time comes hard. Saved many lives. Lila flushed but thanked her. As the families settled in with their children, she noticed Eli watching her with an unreadable expression. What? Nothing, just, you keep surprising me. He turned away before she could ask what he meant. Later, as Lila helped settle the youngest Apache children with blankets, one of them, a girl of perhaps 6, tugged on her skirt. Pretty lady, she said in careful English. Bad man watches you? What bad man, sweetheart? The girl pointed out the stable door toward town. Shadow man, follows, hides. My grandfather sees him in the spirit walk. Before Lila could ask more, the girl's mother called her away, but the warning settled into Lila's bones like a chill, as if to confirm the child's words. Eli appeared at her shoulder. We've got company, he murmured. Spotted him an hour ago, keeping to the alleys, watching the inn. One of Hale's men. Maybe our mysterious robbers want to make sure their frame is holding. He paused. I'm staying close tonight. Got my bedroll. I'll sleep in the hall outside your door. Once, she might have protested the presumption. Now, she simply nodded. Thank you. As the inn settled for the night, Lila found herself at her window, looking out at the dust-covered town. Somewhere out there, forces were moving against her. But something had changed during the storm. The townspeople had seen Hale's opportunism, had heard the doubts about the robbery, and the Apache families in the stable by morning. Word would spread that the suspicious Miss Carter had opened her doors to those in need. In the territories, action spoke louder than accusations, and Lila intended to make sure hers spoke volumes. A soft knock at her door made her turn. It's me. Eli's voice came through the wood. Wanted to show you something. She opened the door to find him holding a leather journal. Found this in the drift outside. Wind must have torn it from somewhere. Look at the cover. Burned into the leather was a symbol the same one she'd noticed on the mysterious horseshoe tracks. Below it, barely visible, were initials J.T. Jake Thornton, Eli said grimly. Rides with the Colson gang out of Mexico. If he's involved in this, then we're dealing with more than just Hale's greed, Lila finished. We're dealing with killers who won't stop at 2 guards. They stood there in the lamplight, the journal between them like a promise of darker days ahead. Outside, the dust was settling, but Lila knew the real storm was just beginning. The abandoned mission of San Teodoro sat 15 miles north of Dry Creek, its adobe walls crumbling back to the earth they'd risen from. Eli and Lila reached it just as the afternoon sun was starting its descent, their horses tired from picking through rocky terrain. Father Miguel died in 69 inches, Eli explained as they dismounted. Cholera took him and most of his congregation. Place has been empty since. They'd left before dawn, telling Carrie they were checking on a homestead damaged in the dust storm. It wasn't entirely a lie. They'd stopped at the widow Patterson's place and helped her repair a collapsed chicken coop. But their real destination was the mission, where Mara's sources said the old priest had kept meticulous records of land grants and water rights. The heavy wooden doors groaned as they pushed inside. Dust motes danced in the colored light from a partially intact stained glass window. Pews sat in crooked rows, slowly being reclaimed by sand and time. The rectory's through here. Eli led the way, his hand never far from his pistol. They'd seen no sign of being followed, but both had learned to trust their instincts over their eyes. The rectory was a small room behind the altar, lined with shelves that had once held books. Most were gone stolen or rotted away, but a heavy trunk sat in the corner, its lock long since broken. "Keep watch," Lila said, kneeling beside it. She began carefully removing documents, yellowed with age but still readable. Birth certificates, death records, marriage licenses, the accumulated paperwork of lives lived and lost. "Here," she breathed, pulling out a leather folder. Inside were land surveys, marked with the official seal of the territorial government. "Look at this, the original grant for Dry Creek's water rights. Dated 1851. Eli scanned the documents while maintaining his watch. "Says here the water rights were granted to the town collectively, to be managed by elected trustees for the common good. No provision for private sale. Which means Hale's purchase from the previous trustees was illegal." Eli's satisfaction was grim. Man's been building his empire on a foundation of sand. A sound from outside made them both freeze, the distinctive clink of a bridle. Eli moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "3 riders," he murmured. "Coming fast." Lila quickly stuffed the documents into her saddlebag. They slipped out the back of the rectory, leading their horses into the mission's old cemetery. Ancient headstones provided cover as they circled toward a line of cottonwoods that marked an old stream bed. They'd almost made it when a shot rang out, splinters exploding from a wooden cross near Lila's head. Their horses spooked, and suddenly they were in a flat run across open ground, more shots kicking up dust around them. The stream bed appeared like a miracle, a 6-foot drop into a sandy wash. They plunged down, horses sliding, and took off along the winding channel. Behind them, shouts and the thunder of pursuit. "There," Eli pointed to a narrow side canyon, barely visible behind a screen of mesquite. They veered into it, the walls closing in until they could touch both sides. 100 yards in, the canyon widened into a small box end with an overhang of rock. "Get behind those boulders," Eli ordered, already pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Take the horses deeper in. You can't hold off 3 men alone." "Won't have to. This is a death trap for them, same as us. They'll have to come single file." He was already positioning himself behind a fallen slab of sandstone. "Go!" Lila led the nervous horses to the back of the box canyon, then grabbed her own rifle, an old Henry that had belonged to her father. She found a position above and to the right of Eli, giving her a clear line of sight down the narrow approach. The first rider appeared, silhouetted against the bright opening. Eli's shot took his hat off and sent him diving for cover. A voice Lila recognized as Walt Grissom's called out. "Nowhere to run. McKenna, make this easy on yourself and the woman." "Easy like you made it for those 2 guards," Eli called back. Jim Harper had a wife and 3 kids. That weren't personal, just business. This don't have to be personal either. Just give us the papers and ride away. Lila sighted down her rifle, drawing a bead on a spot of color, someone's shirt visible through the brush. She squeezed off a shot, heard a yelp and cursing. "The lady's got teeth," another voice laughed. "Boss ain't gonna like that." "Boss ain't here," Grissom snarled. "And I'm done talking." What followed was a careful, deadly game. The attackers tried to advance up the narrow canyon, using cover and concealment, but the defenders had position and patience. Every rushed move drew fire. Time crawled in the heat, measured in shots and shifting shadows. Then Lila noticed something, a slight movement high on the canyon wall. One of the attackers was trying to climb around, to get above them. She touched Eli's shoulder, pointed. He nodded grimly. "Watch the mouth," he murmured, then began working his way up the opposite wall. Lila divided her attention between the canyon entrance and Eli's progress, her heart hammering every time loose rock cascaded down. The climber appeared over a ledge, rifle swinging toward Eli's position. Lila's shot was pure instinct, leading him just enough. He jerked, lost his grip, and tumbled down the cliff face to land in a motionless heap. Tommy Grissom's roar echoed off the walls. "You killed Tommy, you—" His words were cut off by a rapid series of shots from below. In his rage, Grissom had exposed himself, and Eli didn't miss the opportunity. Lila saw the outlaw spin and fall, clutching his shoulder. "I'm done," the third attacker called out. "Don't shoot, I'm leaving." They heard horses retreating rapidly down the canyon. Eli waited a full 10 minutes before climbing down, approaching the fallen men carefully. Grissom was alive but badly wounded, blood soaking his shirt. "Should have stayed clear," Eli told him. "This was never your fight." "Everything's somebody's fight." Grissom gasped. "Hale owns half the territory. You think these papers matter? He'll just buy new judges." "Maybe," Lila said, appearing at Eli's shoulder. "But at least the truth will be known." Grissom laughed, a wet, painful sound. "Truth. That's rich. You want truth. Ask your man there about Bitter Springs. Ask him about the Pettis family." Eli went very still. Lila saw something shut down in his eyes, like a door closing. Without a word, he began binding Grissom's wound, his movements mechanical. They loaded the wounded outlaw onto his horse, tied him secure. The other man was beyond help. As they prepared to leave, Lila touched Eli's arm. "What happened at Bitter Springs?" "Later," he said roughly. "We need to move. That third man will bring reinforcements." They rode hard, taking a circuitous route back to Dry Creek. Grissom drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering occasionally. As they neared town, Eli suddenly reined in. "Smoke," he said, pointing to a black column rising from the direction of the inn. They spurred forward, fear driving them now, but when they crested the last rise, they saw it wasn't the Coyote ledger burning, it was Henderson's store. Townsfolk had formed a bucket brigade, fighting the flames. "Lightning strike," someone called out as they rode up. "Hit during the storm this morning." Morning storm. Lila realized they'd been gone longer than planned. As they delivered Grissom to the sheriff's office, Dalton had no choice but to take custody. With half the town watching, she noticed the looks they were getting. Curious, speculative, some hostile. "Where you two been?" Sheriff Dalton demanded. "Mister, Hale's been looking for you all day. Says you stole important documents from his office." Hard to steal something that was never his. Lila replied, patting her saddlebag. "These papers belong to the town. I'm calling a public meeting tonight to share what we found." "You can't just—" "Yes, Sheriff, I can. It's called democracy. You might remember it from before Hale bought your badge." The crowd murmured approval. Someone mentioned the old town charter, how any citizen could call a meeting on matters of public concern. Dalton had no grounds to refuse. As word spread, Lila felt the tide beginning to turn, but Grissom's words haunted her, and the closed look on Eli's face when Bitter Springs was mentioned. Whatever truth waited there, she sensed it might be more dangerous than all of Hale's schemes combined. That evening, as she prepared for the meeting, Eli appeared in her doorway. His face was haggard, older somehow. "About Bitter Springs," he began, then stopped, struggling for words. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. If this is going where I think it's going, you deserve to know." He took a deep breath. "I led a posse there in '79. We were tracking the Colson gang. Got word they were hiding at the Pettis Ranch. What we didn't know was that Pettis had sent his family away, was being held hostage. When we rode in shooting—" His voice broke. Lila reached for his hand, held it tight. The youngest Pettis boy, Samuel, was hiding in the barn. Crossfire caught him. He was the same age as— Eli stopped again, unable to continue. "As the child you couldn't save before," Lila finished softly. "Oh, Eli." "I carry their faces," he whispered. "All of them. Every mistake, every failure. It's why I quit wearing a badge. Why I've been running same as you." She pulled him close, feeling the tremor that ran through his solid frame. They stood there as shadows lengthened, two damaged souls finding shelter in each other. Outside, the bell was ringing, calling the town to meeting. Time to face whatever came next, together. The storm came out of nowhere just past midnight, thunder cracking like rifle shots across the desert sky. Lila woke to the sound of rain hammering on the tin roof, a sound so rare in Dry Creek that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then she heard the scream. She was out of bed and running before fully awake, her nightgown billowing as she raced down the stairs. In the street, Maria Vasquez stood in the rain, clutching her swollen belly, her husband frantically supporting her. "The baby," Carlos gasped. "It comes too soon. The midwife, she went to Tucson yesterday." "Bring her inside," Lila commanded, already taking charge. "Eli, we need hot water, clean sheets." Eli appeared from the stable where he'd been keeping watch, took in the situation at a glance, and began barking orders. Within minutes, they had Maria settled in the inn's best room, while Carlos paced outside like a caged mountain cat. "I helped my mother with birthings back home," Lila told Maria, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "And the Apache woman, she gave me medicine." Another contraction hit, and Maria's scream cut through the storm. Lila had assisted with births before, but never as the primary attendant. Fear crawled up her spine, but she pushed it down. There was no one else. The hours that followed blurred together pain and struggle, the storm raging outside while inside. The older battle between life and death played out. Lila used everything she'd learned, everything her mother had taught her, and when traditional methods weren't enough, she remembered the Apache woman's gifts. "Small sips," she instructed, helping Maria drink the herbal tea. The effect was almost immediate, the contractions regulated, the panic in Maria's eyes easing. Eli proved an unexpected ally, steady and calm, following her instructions without question. When she needed someone to hold Maria's hand so she could check the baby's position, he was there. When clean water ran low, he ventured into the storm to draw more from the well. Dawn was breaking, the storm reduced to a gentle patter. When Maria's daughter finally made her entrance into the world, the baby was small but fierce, her cries strong and healthy. "Esperanza?" Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We'll call her Hope." Lila cleaned and wrapped the infant with shaking hands, the magnitude of what they'd accomplished hitting her all at once. She'd helped bring life into the world, had faced down death and won. "You did good," Eli said quietly, his hand warm on her shoulder. "Real good." She turned to answer and found him closer than expected, his gray eyes soft with something that made her breath catch. The kitchen was empty. Carlos was with his family. The other guests still abed. They were alone with the gentle morning light and the coffee slowly heating on the stove. "I should—" she started, but couldn't finish. Should what step away? Pretend this moment wasn't happening, that she hadn't been thinking about him every quiet moment since that night in the canyon. Lila. Her name was rough on his lips. "I've been trying to keep my distance. You deserve better than a broken-down trail hand with too many ghosts. But watching you tonight, seeing your strength..." She reached up, touched his face, felt the rasp of stubble against her palm. "We're all broken somehow. Eli, question is whether we let it define us or whether we build something new from the pieces." He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm, and she felt that touch all the way to her toes. The kitchen suddenly seemed too warm, the air charged with possibility. They'd made a simple meal together before, but tonight felt different. They moved around each other with new awareness, every accidental touch sending sparks. When she reached for the cornmeal, he was there first, their hands meeting on the container. When he carved the leftover ham, she found herself watching the sure movement of his hands, remembering their gentleness during the birthing. "The bread's burning," he said suddenly, and she realized she'd been staring. Flustered, she rescued the biscuits just in time. "They're fine, just well done." His laugh was low and warm. "If you say so." They assembled a meal bean slow-cooked with ham, the rescued biscuits, preserves from last summer's peaches. Simple fare, but it felt like a feast. They ate in companionable silence, the storm finally passing outside, leaving the world washed clean. "Tell me about your dream," Eli said finally. "The shop you want to open." So she did, describing her vision of a place that was both bakery and seamstress shop, where women could gather for coffee and conversation while she mended their clothes and filled their kitchens with good bread. As she talked, she could see it taking shape in his eyes too. "Could build you good shelves," he offered. "Display cases with glass fronts for your goods. Maybe a big work table." He paused, gesturing at the sturdy table between them. "Like this one, but sized right for cutting fabric and rolling dough." The mention of the table changed something in the air between them. Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks, remembering his hands on the wood, the careful way he'd sanded it smooth. Such careful hands, she thought, then felt her blush deepen at where her thoughts were heading. "It's a good table," she said, her voice coming out huskier than intended. "Solid construction." He agreed, but his eyes weren't on the furniture. "Built to last." She stood to clear the dishes, needing movement, needing space to think. But when she reached for his plate, he caught her wrist gently. "Lila," he said, and there was a question in it, a door opening if she chose to walk through. She looked at him, this good man who'd stood by her against all odds, who'd trusted her with his darkest secrets, who looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made her choice. "The dishes can wait," she said softly. His chair scraped back as he stood, and suddenly the kitchen felt too small to contain them both. She was aware of every inch of space between them, of the way the morning light caught in his hair, of the pulse beating visibly in his throat. "I should warn you," he said roughly. "I'm not a man who loves lightly. If we do this..." "Then we do it," she finished. No half measures, no running. Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down. He reached up, unpinned her hair with careful fingers, watching it tumble down around her shoulders. "Beautiful," he murmured, and she wasn't sure if he meant her hair or something more. The space between them disappeared. His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. She could smell wood smoke and leather, coffee and the faint herb scent from Maria's birthing. When he lowered his head, she rose to meet him, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss was everything their careful distance had been holding back weeks of tension and tenderness, fear and hope, all distilled into the press of lips and the tangle of breath. She gasped against his mouth, and he made a sound low in his throat that sent heat spiraling through her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she found herself pressed back against the table, its solid edge digging into her spine. The wood was smooth under her palms when she braced herself, and she had a wild thought about the care he'd taken in building it. The love in every joint and plane. "Spread me on the table," she ordered. He obeyed, holding her against his chest, wild and unrestrained. The lamp flickered and went out, leaving them in the gentle darkness of early morning. The storm passed and a new day dawning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. No longer two solitary souls, but something stronger, something forged in tenderness and trial. Later, much later, they sat again at that same table, watching the sun climb high enough to send dusty rays through the window. Coffee cooled between them, forgotten in the face of this new thing they'd built. "No regrets?" Eli asked, his thumb tracing circles on her hand. "None," Lila said firmly. "We've wasted enough time on regret, don't you think?" He lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles one by one. "Then let's make a pact. From here on, we look forward, not back. Build something worth having." "Together," she agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of coffee and promises. Outside, Dry Creek was waking up, unaware that everything had changed in the kitchen of the Coyote Ledger. But Lila knew, felt it in her bones, this was the beginning of something worth fighting for. And fight they would, against whatever schemes Hale had brewing, against the prejudices of small minds, against the harsh realities of frontier life. But first, there were dishes to wash and a day to face, and the simple pleasure of doing both beside the man who'd carved her a table and given her his heart. In the end, maybe that's what love was, not grand gestures, but small ones. Not perfection, but the willingness to build something beautiful from imperfect pieces. The coffee was cold. The biscuits were slightly burned. And somewhere upstairs, a newborn baby named Hope was taking her first breaths in a washed, clean world. It was, Lila thought, a very good morning indeed. The rain had been a blessing at first. After months of drought, the people of Dry Creek had danced in the streets as the first drops fell. But that was 3 days ago. Now, as Eli stood on the ridge overlooking Skeleton Canyon, he could hear the ominous roar of water rushing through what had been a dry wash just hours before. "Flash flood coming," he told the small group assembled behind him. They'd ridden out at dawn after reports that Hale's men were moving something big through the canyon. "That water hits the Narrows. It'll sweep away anything in its path." "Including Hale's wagon," said Tom Brennan, the former mine guard who'd switched sides after learning the truth about his murdered partners. "Heard they're hauling dynamite and ammunition, planning to blow the old Spanish bridge once they're across. Cut off pursuit." Lila shifted in her saddle beside Eli. 3 weeks had passed since that morning in the kitchen. 3 weeks of stolen moments and careful planning. Now it was all coming to a head. The town meeting had gone better than expected once the citizens saw the original land grants. Support for Hale had crumbled, but a cornered snake was the most dangerous kind. "There," Miguel Sandoval pointed to dust rising from the canyon floor. 4 wagons, maybe a dozen riders. Eli raised his field glasses, studying the scene below. The wooden bridge spanning the canyon looked fragile as matchsticks against the backdrop of red rock. Already, he could see brown water beginning to pool at the upstream end of the canyon. "We need to warn them," Lila said. "Whatever they've done, they don't deserve to drown." "They wouldn't do the same for you," Brennan spat. "That's what makes us different from them," Eli replied, already calculating angles and distances. "Miguel, you and Tom ride downstream. See if you can cut them off at Devil's Elbow. Rest of us will come from above." They split up, spurring their horses down treacherous paths slick with new rain. The roar of water grew louder, and Eli could see the flood, now a wall of brown chaos carrying trees, boulders, and desert debris. The lead wagon was just approaching the bridge when Eli fired a warning shot. The convoy lurched to a halt, men scrambling for weapons. Walt Grissom, his arm still in a sling from their last encounter, spotted them first. "McKenna should have known you'd show up." "Get off that bridge," Eli shouted. "Flood's coming." For a moment, Grissom hesitated, looking upstream. Then his face hardened. "Nice try, but we ain't falling for it." The sound hit them like thunder. Every head turned to see the flood rounding the bend, a 30-foot wall of destruction that turned grown men's faces white with terror. "Move, move, move!" Grissom screamed, whipping his team forward. The wagons lurched onto the bridge, wheels slipping on wet wood. But the third wagon stuck, its wheels catching in a gap between planks. Without thought, Eli spurred his horse down the steep slope. He could hear Lila calling his name, but there was no time. Men were abandoning the stuck wagon, running for their lives. But the driver, barely more than a boy, was tangled in the reins, his horses panicking. Eli reached him just as the flood hit the canyon mouth. The impact shook the earth, spray exploding upward like a geyser. He slashed the reins with his knife, grabbed the boy around the waist, and hauled him onto his horse. "The bridge!" someone screamed. The wooden structure groaned, twisted, then simply disappeared into the maelstrom. The stuck wagon went with it, along with two men who'd tried to save the cargo. Eli's horse scrambled up the slope, fighting for purchase on loose rock, the flood nipping at their heels. They made it to high ground just as the water claimed the spot where they'd been. The boy in Eli's arms was sobbing with terror, clinging to him like a child, which he was. Eli realized with sick certainty, maybe 15 at most, trying to look older with trail dust and borrowed swagger. "Easy, son," he murmured. "You're safe now." On the far side of the vanished bridge, Grissom and his surviving men stared across the churning water. Their wagons full of weapons and dynamite were on the wrong side of an uncrossable torrent, and Miguel's group was closing in from downstream. "It's over! Grissom!" Tom Brennan shouted. "Throw down your guns!" What followed wasn't a battle. It was barely even a fight. Demoralized and outnumbered, Hale's gunmen surrendered one by one. Only Grissom held out, his good hand on his pistol. "You got lucky, McKenna," he called across the flood. "But this ain't over, mister. Hale's got judges, senators, even a territorial governor who owes him favors. You think some pieces of paper will stop him?" "Maybe not," Eli replied. "But they'll slow him down long enough for folks to see him clear. And once they do," he shrugged, "even bought judges can't save a man the whole territory wants hanged." Grissom's laugh was bitter. "You really believe that you believe in justice?" He gestured at the boy still clinging to Eli. "That's my nephew, sister's boy. I brought him out here, promised him adventure and easy money. Now look at him." "He's alive," Lila said, having made her way down to them. "That's more than those guards' families can say." Something broke in Grissom's face. He let his gun drop, shoulders sagging. "Take him," he said roughly. "The boy, take him away from this. His name's Jamie. Tell his ma. Tell her I'm sorry." The flood was beginning to recede, leaving destruction in its wake. They rounded up the prisoners, recovered what they could from the abandoned wagons. In one, they found something unexpected: ledgers detailing not just Hale's water rights scheme, but a network of corruption stretching from Dry Creek to the capital. Names, dates, amounts. Tom whistled. He kept records of every bribe, every threat, every crooked deal. "Man like Hale doesn't trust anybody," Eli observed. "Probably figured keeping dirt on his associates was insurance." "Now it's evidence," Lila said with satisfaction. The ride back to Dry Creek was subdued. Jamie rode with Eli, silent and shell-shocked. The prisoners walked, hands tied, Grissom helping those injured in the flood. As they crested the final ridge, they saw smoke rising from the town. "No," Lila breathed. They spurred forward, fearing the worst. But as they got closer, they realized it wasn't buildings burning, it was a bonfire in the main street. And gathered around it were what looked like half the town's population. Sheriff Dalton lay on the ground, thoroughly trussed. Beside him, Victor Hale stood with his hands bound, his fine suit torn and muddy, his face twisted with rage. Holding a shotgun on both of them was Mara Quinn, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "About time you showed up." She called out, "Mister, Hale here decided to pay the inn a visit while you were gone. Brought some friends to search for those documents. Unfortunately for him, he found the Women's Temperance Society having their monthly meeting instead. You should see the other guys." "Mrs.," Henderson added cheerfully, gesturing to several groaning men sporting various improvised injuries. Amazing what damage a determined woman can do with a rolling pin. Old Sam Carey pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down his weathered face. "They tried to burn my inn," he said, "but folks wouldn't let 'em. Formed a bucket brigade, fought them off. This whole town stood up to 'em." "Not the whole town." Mayor Frederick stepped forward, shame clear on his face. "Some of us were cowards. Let Hale buy our silence, our compliance, but no more." He unpinned his mayor's badge, handed it to Carey. "I resign. Town needs leaders with backbone." One by one, others came forward. The bank manager admitting to falsifying records, the assayer confessing to undervaluing claims Hale wanted to buy, even Doc Patterson, revealing how Hale had blackmailed him over a mistake made years ago. It was like a dam breaking, years of fear and corruption washing away in a flood of truth. "None of this matters," Hale snarled. "I own judges. I own senators. You think these territorial lawmen will take your word over mine?" "They might not," a new voice said, "but they'll take mine." Everyone turned to see a man in a federal marshal's badge riding into town, followed by a detail of soldiers from Fort Huachuca. "Marshal Jonas Crawford," he introduced himself. "Got an interesting telegraph from a Miss Mara Quinn about corruption in territorial government. Thought I'd come investigate personally." "And the Army?" Hale's voice had lost its certainty. "Well now." The marshal smiled coldly. "Seems someone's been selling army ammunition to bandits across the border. That makes it federal business. Colonel's very interested in having a chat with you, Mr. Hale." As they led Hale away, he turned back one last time. His eyes found Lila, standing with Eli's arm around her, and his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll be back. "No," Eli said quietly. "You won't." There was something in his tone, a finality that made even Hale pause. Then the moment passed, and the former king of Dry Creek was just another prisoner being loaded onto a wagon. The celebration lasted long into the night. The saloon opened its doors, drinks on the house. The church bells rang until Father Francisco worried they'd crack. And in the street, people danced to fiddle music, celebrating not just Hale's defeat but their own courage in standing up to him. Lila found herself swept into dance after dance, passed from partner to partner while Eli watched from the boardwalk, a small smile playing at his lips. When she finally escaped to join him, breathless and laughing, he pulled her into the shadows between buildings. "Proud of you," he murmured against her hair. "You started all this, gave folks the courage to stand up." "We started it," she corrected. "Together." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while music and laughter spilled into the night around them. When they broke apart, she saw Jamie sitting alone on the steps of the general store, looking lost. "What will happen to him?" she asked. "Tom Brennan's offered to take him on at his ranch. Says the boy deserves a chance to learn honest work." Eli paused. "Might visit him myself time to time. Make sure he's settling in." It was so like him, she thought, to take responsibility even for his enemy's kin. She squeezed his hand, and together they walked back into the light and music and hope of a town reborn. The real work would come tomorrow, rebuilding trust, establishing new leadership, preparing for the railroad that would still come. There would be trials and testimonies. the slow grinding of justice making its way. But tonight, Dry Creek celebrated, and in the morning, they would begin building something new from the ashes of the old, something honest and true and worth defending. The circuit judge arrived on a Tuesday, his black coat dusty from the road and his expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Harold Whitman had a reputation for fairness, which was why Marshal Crawford had specifically requested him for the trials that would reshape Dry Creek. The courthouse was packed, every seat taken and people standing along the walls. Lila sat in the front row between Eli and Mara, her hands folded tightly in her lap. 3 weeks of depositions and evidence gathering had led to this moment. Victor Hale sat at the defendant's table, still immaculate despite his time in custody. He'd hired lawyers from Phoenix, men in city suits who looked at the assembled townspeople like they were viewing exotic animals. But their confident smiles faltered when they saw the mountain of evidence Marshal Crawford had assembled. The territory calls Miss Lila Mae Carter to the stand, the prosecutor announced. Lila rose on unsteady legs. Eli's hand brushed hers briefly, a silent reminder of strength. She took the oath and settled into the witness chair, meeting Hale's cold stare without flinching. "Miss Carter," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about the events of August 15th. She spoke clearly, detailing the morning the robbery accusations began, the planted handkerchief, the systematic harassment that followed. When Hale's lawyer tried to twist her words during cross-examination, she remained calm, sticking to facts. "Isn't it true, Miss Carter, that you had personal reasons to dislike Mr. Hale?" the lawyer pressed. "I had no opinion of Mr. Hale until he tried to frame me for murder," Lila replied evenly. "That did tend to sour my impression." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Judge Whitman banged his gavel, but Lila caught what might have been amusement in his stern expression. The testimony continued for hours. Tom Brennan detailed the robbery, how the route had been changed at the last minute by Hale himself. Mara presented the shipping manifests showing systematic theft. Even Walt Grissom, brought from the territorial prison, testified about Hale's orders to eliminate witnesses. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Margaret Hale, Victor's wife, took the stand on the second day. She'd arrived from San Francisco, where she'd been staying with her sister, a thin woman with haunted eyes who clutched a worn Bible. "Mrs. Hale," Judge Whitman said gently, "you understand you're not required to testify against your husband." "I understand, Your Honor, but I can't stay silent anymore." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Not after what he did to those men, not after years of watching him destroy anyone who stood in his way." She produced letters correspondence between Hale and various officials, discussing bribes, threats, and worse. One letter, dated just days before the robbery, outlined the plan to frame someone at the Coyote Ledger to force a sale. "He said it would be easy," Margaret testified. "Said people would believe anything about a single woman with no family to defend her." He laughed about it. Hale's face had gone progressively darker during his wife's testimony. When she finished, he half rose from his chair. "You treacherous—" "Sit down, Mr. Hale," Judge Whitman ordered coldly. "You'll have your chance to speak." When Hale finally took the stand in his own defense, his smooth confidence had cracked. He tried to paint himself as a businessman bringing progress to a backward town, but the prosecutor systematically destroyed each claim. "These ledgers show you skimmed over $100,000 from the mining company," the prosecutor stated. "Creative accounting," Hale insisted. "These depositions show you ordered the murder of 2 guards. Hearsay from criminals trying to reduce their sentences. Your own wife's letters." "A woman scorned," Hale snarled. "She's bitter because I sought comfort elsewhere. Nothing she says can be trusted." It went on for 3 days. By the end, even Hale's expensive lawyers looked defeated. When the jury retired to deliberate, betting in the saloon was not on the verdict, but on how quickly it would come. 47 minutes later, they filed back in. "We find the defendant guilty on all charges," the foreman announced. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitman gavelled for order. "Victor Hale, you are sentenced to 25 years hard labor for murder, theft, and conspiracy. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none to spare." As they led Hale away, he passed close to Lila. "This isn't over," he whispered. "I have friends, resources you can't imagine, and I have something you never understood." Lila replied quietly, "I have a community." The trials continued for another week. Sheriff Dalton received 10 years. Several of Hale's gunmen got varying sentences. But there was mercy, too. Those who'd been coerced rather than bribed received lighter sentences or community service. On the final day, Judge Whitman addressed the packed courthouse. "This town has been through a trial by fire. You've seen how corruption can take root, how fear can make good people silent. But you've also shown that courage is contagious, that truth will out when brave souls stand together. Don't forget these lessons." After the judge left town, Dry Creek set about rebuilding more than just its leadership. A new town council was elected, with Sam Carey as mayor and Mara Quinn, to many people's surprise, as treasurer. "Who better to handle the town's money than someone who knows every trick in the book?" she said when questioned. The water rights were officially returned to community control, managed by an elected board. The first act was to dig 3 new wells, ensuring no single person could control the town's lifeline again. But perhaps the most significant change came from an unexpected direction. Margaret Hale, freed from her marriage by her husband's conviction, announced she was staying in Dry Creek. "I need to make amends," she told Lila one evening, as they worked together in the inn's kitchen. "For years, I knew what Victor was doing and said nothing. I was comfortable being blind." "You spoke up when it mattered," Lila assured her. "Too late for those guards. Too late for so many others." Margaret's hands stilled on the bread she was kneading. "But perhaps not too late to do some good." She used what remained of her personal fortune money inherited from her father, not touched by Hale's crimes, to establish several trusts. One for the families of the murdered guards, another for a school, free to all children regardless of background, and a third for a medical clinic, with a permanent doctor and supplies. The railroad company, watching these developments, announced that Dry Creek would indeed receive a depot. "We prefer to invest in communities with strong leadership and clear legal frameworks," their representative said. 3 months after Hale's conviction, Lila stood in front of a building on Main Street, key in hand. The sign above the door read Hearth and Home Bakery and Seamstress Shop. Eli had spent weeks renovating the space, building shelves and display cases exactly as they dreamed. "You ready?" he asked, standing beside her. She nodded, turned the key, and stepped into her future. The shop smelled of fresh lumber and possibility. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, illuminating the workspace where she'd create and build and serve her community. "It's perfect," she breathed. "It's a start," Eli corrected, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "We'll make it perfect together." The grand opening drew most of the town. Maria Vasquez, baby Esperanza in her arms, was the first customer, ordering a christening gown. Tom Brennan commissioned work shirts, joking that honest labor was harder on clothes than outlawing ever was. Even Judge Whitman, passing through again, stopped to purchase bread and compliment the shop. As the sun set on that first day, Lila and Eli sat on the boardwalk outside the shop, watching Dry Creek go about its evening routines. Children played in the street. Couples strolled arm in arm. The saloon's piano tinkled with ragtime melodies. "Hale was wrong," Eli observed. "He thought fear was stronger than community, thought money could buy anything." "He never understood," Lila agreed, "that the things worth having can't be bought or stolen. They have to be earned, built, protected." Speaking of building, Eli shifted, suddenly nervous. "I've been thinking," That apartment above your shop is sitting empty. Seems a waste, and I'm tired of sleeping in the stable loft. Lila turned to look at him, eyebrow raised. Are you asking to move in, Mr. McKenna? I'm asking for more than that. He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold ring. Nothing fancy, but gleaming with promise. I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, real and proper and permanent. She looked at the ring, at his weathered face so full of hope and uncertainty, at the town they'd fought to save spreading out around them. Then she held out her hand. Yes, she said simply, let's build something permanent. He slipped the ring on her finger as the last light faded from the sky, and Dry Creek settled into another peaceful night. Somewhere out there, Hale sat in a prison cell, his empire dust, his former associates scattered to the wind or behind bars themselves. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the promise of tomorrow, the warmth of community, and the knowledge that they'd earned their happiness through courage, sacrifice, and standing together against the storm. The new Dry Creek was far from perfect. It still had problems, disagreements, the usual small-town feuds and follies, but it was honest. It was theirs. And that, Lila thought as Eli kissed her under the first stars, made all the difference. A year had passed since Victor Hale's trial, and Dry Creek had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The spring rains had been generous this season, painting the desert with wildflowers and filling the newly dug wells to capacity. Standing outside her shop in the early morning light, Lila McKenna. She still smiled at her married name, watched the town stirring to life. The railroad depot stood proudly at the edge of town, its red brick facade a symbol of connection to the wider world. Twice a week, the train brought supplies, mail, and new faces seeking opportunity in a town that had become known for fair dealing and strong community. Fresh bread's ready. Eli called from inside, where he'd been helping her prepare for the morning rush. He'd expanded his carpentry business, taking on 2 apprentices, including Jamie Grissom, who'd grown 3 inches and lost the haunted look that had shadowed him since the flood. The bell above the door chimed as their first customer entered. Margaret Hale, she'd taken back her maiden name. Margaret Sinclair smiled warmly as she approached the counter. The usual, Lila asked, already reaching for a loaf of sourdough and 2 cinnamon rolls. Please, and I'll need 3 dozen cookies for the school fundraiser tomorrow. Margaret had thrown herself into education work, teaching alongside the professional educator her trust had hired. The children are selling baked goods to raise money for new books. I'll have them ready, Lila promised. How's the clinic coming along? Dr. Morrison says we'll be ready to open next month. Can you imagine a real hospital ward? Right here in Dry Creek. Margaret's eyes shone with purpose. She'd found redemption in service, transforming from a ghost of a woman into one of the town's most vital citizens. As Margaret left, more customers streamed in. Ranchers needing provisions, mothers ordering birthday cakes, travelers drawn by the scent of fresh baking. Lila's assistant, young Ruth Patterson, helped manage the steady flow while Lila caught up on seamstress work between rushes. Letter came for you, Eli said during a quiet moment, handing her an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Lila opened it carefully, her eyes widening as she read. It's from Walt Grissom. He's thanking us. Says prison's given him time to think, to realize what kind of man he'd become. He's learning to read properly, wants to be better when he gets out. Man can change. Eli observed, if he wants it bad enough. The morning passed in comfortable rhythm customers, conversation, the familiar dance of commerce and community. Around noon, Mara Quinn swept in, dressed in a respectable business suit that still somehow managed to turn heads. Monthly council meeting tonight, she announced. We're voting on the new courthouse expansion and discussing the Harvest Festival. Will there be dancing? Asked Ruth eagerly. Would it be a festival without dancing? Mara's smile was warm. The former saloon owner had surprised everyone by becoming one of the town's most effective leaders. The Silver Finch had been transformed into a respectable restaurant and meeting hall, though Mara still kept her office upstairs, claiming the view helped her think. "Oh, and Lila," Mara added. "That idea of yours about a women's business association, I've got 6 others interested. We could meet here Sunday afternoons if you're willing." "I'll have tea and cake ready," Lila promised. As the afternoon wore on, Eli returned to his workshop while Lila focused on a wedding dress commission. The peaceful productivity was interrupted by the arrival of Tom Brennan, his face grave. "Trouble?" Lila asked, setting aside her needlework. "Maybe. Got word that some of Hale's old associates are sniffing around Tucson, asking questions about Dry Creek." He held up a hand at her alarm. "Nothing immediate. Marshal Crawford's keeping an eye on things. Just thought you should know." "We've faced worse," Lila said firmly. "We'll handle whatever comes." Tom's expression softened. "That we will. This town's got spine now. Speaking of which, young Jamie wanted me to tell you he'll be by tomorrow to fix that loose shelf. Boy's turning into a fine carpenter under Eli's teaching." After Tom left, Lila found herself reflecting on the changes not just in the town, but in herself. The scared woman who'd arrived in Dry Creek with nothing but determination and a skill with needle and thread was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her own strength, who'd faced down powerful men and won, who'd built a life worth defending. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. Father Francisco entered hesitantly, clutching a worn piece of fabric. "Signora McKenna, I have a strange request. This was my mother's christening gown. It's very old, very damaged, but could you possibly—" "Let me see." Lila examined the delicate garment. Silk so old it was nearly transparent in places. Embroidery that spoke of hours of loving work. "It's beautiful. And yes, I can restore it. It will take time, careful work, but it can be done." The priest's eyes misted. "Gracias. My sister in California. Her first grandchild is coming. She thought it was lost forever, but I kept it, hoping." "Hope's a powerful thing, Father." Lila smiled. "I'll have it ready in time." As closing time approached, Eli returned, sawdust in his hair and satisfaction in his eyes. "Finished the cradle for the Johnsons. Baby's not due for 2 months, but they wanted to be ready." Speaking of babies, Lila felt suddenly shy. She'd been waiting for the right moment all day. Eli went very still. "Lila?" The Apache medicine woman's herbs weren't needed after all. Seems we're naturals at this particular craft. She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Come, Autumn, we'll need a cradle of our own." The joy that blazed across his face was worth all the morning sickness she'd been hiding. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the shop while she laughed and protested about the displays. "A baby," he marveled, setting her down gently. "Our baby." "Our baby," she confirmed, then squeaked as he kissed her thoroughly. They closed the shop early, walking hand in hand through town. Everywhere they looked, they saw signs of renewal. The new school, where children of all backgrounds learned together. The community garden, green with vegetables that would feed families through the winter. The water tower, painted with Dry Creek, a community united, in bold letters. At the cemetery, they paused at 2 new headstones, the murdered guards, finally given proper memorials funded by Margaret's trust. Fresh flowers lay at the bases, and Lila added her own small bouquet. Their families visited last month. Eli said quietly, said knowing justice was done helped them heal. They continued to the edge of town, where construction had begun on new houses. With the railroad bringing prosperity, Dry Creek was growing. But Sam Carey, in his wisdom as mayor, had instituted building codes and community planning. This would be growth with purpose, not the chaotic expansion that had ruined so many boom towns. "Look there!" Eli pointed to where Jamie Grissom was helping frame a house. his movements confident and sure. "Boy's found his place." "We all have," Lila reflected. "Even Dry Creek itself. It's not the same town that let fear rule it." "No," Eli agreed, pulling her close. "It's better. We're all better." As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they made their way to the town square. People were gathering for an impromptu celebration. Someone had brought out a fiddle, and couples were beginning to dance. Children ran between the dancers, laughing while their parents shared news and gossip. Maria Vasquez approached, little Esperanza toddling beside her on increasingly steady legs. "Senora Lila, my husband. He got the promotion at the mine. Shift supervisor. We can afford a real house now. Maybe even send Esperanza to school someday." "She'll go to school," Lila said firmly. "Every child in Dry Creek will have that chance." As if to prove her point, Margaret appeared with a group of children from her class, all races and backgrounds mixed together, singing a song they'd learned about Arizona's history. Their young voices rose clear and sweet in the evening air. "Dance with me," Eli asked, and Lila let him lead her into the square. Around them, Dry Creek celebrated nothing more and nothing less than another day of freedom, of community, of hope made manifest through courage and determination. The stars came out one by one, diamond bright in the clear desert air. Music and laughter drifted on the evening breeze. And in the heart of it all, Lila danced with her husband, their child growing beneath her heart, their future as bright and promising as the morning sun. Dry Creek had been tested by storm and strife, by greed and violence, but it had emerged stronger, a testament to what ordinary people could accomplish when they stood together. The town that had once cowered under Victor Hale's shadow now stood proud and free, a beacon of justice in the vast Arizona territory. As the evening wound down and families drifted home, Lila and Eli sat on their shop's front step, watching the peaceful scene. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, it always did, but tonight they were content to sit together, hands intertwined, building dreams as solid as the table Eli had crafted with such care. "No regrets?" Eli asked, echoing his question from a year ago. "None," Lila answered, leaning against his shoulder. "We built something good here, Eli, something that will last." "That we did," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "That we did." In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and the desert answered with its ancient silence. But here in Dry Creek, life hummed with purpose and promise, a small oasis of civilization where justice had triumphed and love had found a way to flourish against all odds. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. And they would meet it as they had met every challenge together, unafraid and unbreaking. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Lila and Eli's journey through the trials and triumphs of Dry Creek. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance fans from around the world and hear your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier stories of courage, justice, and love. Until next time, partners.